My son hadn't been home in over a decade. Then one day, he suddenly showed up at my door with his wife and kid, calling me Mom, the moment he stepped inside, saying he missed me and wanted to take care of me in my old age. For a moment, I almost believed him. Until the day I found a folder they'd left behind. Inside was a life insurance policy. The beneficiary, my son. The insured, me. But the signature on it, it definitely wasn't mine. He had no idea that he was making one big mistake. He thought I was just another gullible old woman. The morning sun was warm. The air crisp, perfect weather for yard work and spring cleaning. I had just finished pruning the azaleas out front, my hands caked in soil, when I decided to go inside and make myself a cup of tea. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. No one ever drove up my driveway unless it was the mailman or Rick dropping off sod. So when I looked up and saw a silver SUV I didn't recognize, my heart skipped a beat. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in a light jacket. Derek. My only son. The same son I hadn't seen in over a decade. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. He was holding a cheap bouquet of brightly dyed carnations, smiling as he hurried up the path toward me, his steps a little too fast, a little too eager. Mom, I'm back. I missed you. Time seemed to freeze. I hadn't heard that voice in years, especially not saying I missed you. Derek. My son. 15 years ago. He slammed the door behind him and left, swearing he didn't need a nosy old woman running his life. Said he'd never set foot in that nagging little prison of a house again. There were years I thought he might actually be dead. Car accident, overdose, some freak incident. I imagined it all. But here he was, standing on my porch with a supermarket bouquet like he was coming home from college. Then the passenger door opened. Jenna, the daughter-in-law I'd only ever seen in filtered photos on his social media, stepped out holding a little boy's hand. He looked about 5, wide-eyed with tousled hair. He clung to her leg, staring at me in silence. The three of them looked like actors in a play they hadn't rehearsed properly, rushing on stage, forgetting their lines. You've got some nerve coming back, I said. I didn't smile. I didn't move. Derek gave a sheepish, performative grimace. I know I was a mess back then. Life hasn't been kind these past few years. Business failed, hit rock bottom. I just thought maybe it was time to come back, to make things right. Be here for you. He nudged the little boy forward. This is your grandson, Dylan. He's been asking about you. So I thought maybe it's time. Dylan gave a soft, tentative, "Hi, Grandma." His voice was barely above a whisper, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say it. I heard it, but couldn't quite respond. I had imagined meeting my grandson many times, but never like this, distant, formal, with attention no child should carry. I'll admit it. I wasn't ready. The truth is, I'd done just fine on my own all these years. The house may be old, but it's solid. I patched the walls, fixed the plumbing, shoveled snow every winter without complaint. I didn't have many friends, but the ladies at the community center played Scrabble on Tuesdays, and I never missed the Friday poetry readings. Every Christmas, I mailed a card and 2 checks, both unanswered to the last P.O. box Derek had scribbled on a letter. Not because I was naive, but because I didn't know how to let go. I sighed and looked up at him. Come in. And just like that, they stepped into the home I'd lived in alone for 15 years. The doorknob Derek broke during his tantrum. I replaced it. The kitchen cabinets, I repainted them myself. The backyard drainage pipe, I crawled on my knees to fix it. I wondered if he ever thought about how I got by. I wasn't about to ask. Mom, the house looks amazing, he said, setting down his suitcase and glancing around. The roof looks a little worn, though. I'll take a look later. All right, don't carry that on your own. I didn't respond. Just led them to the guest room, smoothed the sheets, and pointed to where I kept the towels. Dinner was, of course, on me. Roast chicken, green beans, and buttery mashed potato as me best dishes. At the table, Derek tried to spark nostalgia, asking if I remembered how he used to sneak candy from my kitchen drawer as a kid. Jenna laughed and chimed in. He won't even take out the trash now, but back then, he was full of ideas. I forced a polite smile and nodded. I didn't know what they were after, but I wasn't about to show my cards. Dylan picked at his chicken slowly, poking at it with his fork while eyeing me from under his lashes. That kid had a strange look. It wasn't the wide-eyed curiosity of a child meeting family. It was like he was watching for something, measuring. After dinner, I was clearing the dishes when Derek offered to help. I declined. Just sit. You'll get lost in my kitchen. He obeyed, to his credit, but kept promising he and Jenna would take over all the cooking and cleaning starting tomorrow. Later, around 9, the doorbell rang. I figured it was Mrs. Ortegami, neighbor and oldest friend. I dried my hands and opened the door. There she was, with a plate of cranberry cookies and wrapped in her hand-knit blue shawl. "Renee," she said, cheerful as ever. "I heard car doors earlier and figured I'd check in. Company." I nodded and let her in. Her eyes scanned the luggage in the corner, then turned to me. "Your son, he didn't even call first." "Nope." I set the cookies on the counter. "He brought the whole family." Mrs. Ortega was quiet for a beat, then said low, "Renee, I know your heart. But someone just showing up after all that time's not always about rekindling bonds." I didn't answer, just nudged the cookie plate toward her. She went on, "Remember my daughter's ex? Out of nowhere, flowers every week. Mr. Perfect. Turns out he was eyeing the house she'd inherited." I pressed my lips into something like a smile. It didn't quite make it. "Just be careful. Don't rush into trusting him. When things feel off, they usually are." I nodded but didn't meet her eyes. The night outside had fallen deep and thick. Crickets sang in waves through the open window, and beneath their chorus, I could hear something else, some little flicker of hope in my chest, flaring up just enough to burn, then slowly sinking back into doubt. The next morning, I was still in the kitchen making coffee when I heard quiet footsteps coming down the stairs. It was Derek. He was wearing an old high school team t-shirt I'd bought him decades ago. The color had faded into something between gray and blue. "I thought I'd make you breakfast," he said with a forced casualness, a little too eager in the eyes. I glanced at the carton of eggs and bacon in his hands and replied flatly, "Pans are on the right. Butter's in the drawer." His movements were clumsy, like someone who hadn't touched a kitchen in years, but was trying hard to look comfortable. I watched as he cracked the eggs into ragged pieces, added too much salt, and whistled off-key while frying the baconas if he were acting out some sitcom called The Prodigal Son Returns. I didn't stop him, just stood at the kitchen doorway, fingers wrapped around my coffee mug, saying nothing. Jenna and Dylan came down soon after. Jenna was dressed in a perfectly pressed loungewear set, her expression a picture of polished poise. She stepped beside me and said in a warm, rehearsed tone, "Mrs. White, I slept so well last night. This house has such a peaceful feel." I nodded without responding. Dylan shuffled over and looked up at me, toothpaste foam still clinging to the corner of his mouth. "Grandma, can we go to the store later? Dad said the market here is fun." I paused, then smiled and tousled his hair. "Of course we can." I'll admit, the kid's words softened something in me. Unlike his father, Dylan's words didn't come with strings attached. He was shy, yes, but he hadn't learned how to fake a smile yet. During breakfast, Derek sat across from me chewing the overcooked eggs and launching into stories about everything he'd been through over the years. I started with a little real estate in Seattle, he began, animated. Then I co-founded a startup with a couple of investors, online education, real cutting-edge stuff. Jenna nodded along, like she'd rehearsed this act. I asked, "Is the company still running?" His voice hesitated. "Well, not really. We pulled out. Funding dried up after the pandemic. I learned a lot, though, about people, about life." He said it with such theatrical sincerity, like he'd weathered a storm and come back wiser. But I remembered him walking out 15 years ago, inheritance check in hand, sneering that he'd never end up planting flowers and wasting away in this deadened town. And now here he was, dressed like a philosopher tempered by the winds of fate. Halfway through the meal, he suddenly said, "Mom, are you still using paper bills? I've got time this week, could help you go through them. A lot of the utility sites have new interfaces now. Don't want you to miss a payment." My grip on my coffee mug tightened slightly. "Thanks, but I've made it this far just fine. Paper and pen haven't failed me yet." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, just offering." That set off a quiet alarm. Derek never cared for receipts, let alone billing systems. Since when did he care about my utility statements? That afternoon, I quietly moved my checkbook and property documents back into the safe in my bedroom. I even hid the spare key inside the flower pot under the bird bath in the backyard. Around sunset, the four of us went to the local supermarket. Dylan wobbled around in the shopping cart while Jenna read from a neatly written grocery list. Derek tossed in bags of snacks when Jenna wasn't looking or pretended not to hear her muttered protests. I followed a few paces behind, oddly detached from the scene. They were laughing, joking, going through the motions, but it all felt like a play, like a show being put on just for me. Back home, Jenna offered to wash some fruit. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her carefully dry each grape with a dish towel. She said, "Derek's nervous. You know, he really wants this to go well. Life out there hasn't been easy for him." I kept my tone steady. "And you want to stay here too?" She smiled, her voice soft but vague. "The air's clean here. Quiet. It feels safer for Dylan." I didn't press further. Everything she said was polite, composed, and perfectly modulated, like a speech practiced in front of a mirror. No slip-ups. But no sincerity either. That night, I sat alone by the window in my bedroom, watching the moon inch its way along the rooftop. One line kept echoing in my head, something Mrs. Ortega had whispered before she left yesterday. "He showed up too suddenly. Renee, watch your back." I had wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, this was my son. But she wasn't the first person to say something felt off about his eyes. I glanced over at the old photo on my nightstand, one of him at 7, standing between me and his father, beaming with the kind of honesty I hadn't seen since. I picked it up and gently wiped the dust from the frame. Softly, I murmured, "Let's hope I'm just overthinking it. Let's hope." I've always had this habit, vacuuming the living room carpet before bed. That night was no exception. Dylan had already fallen asleep, and Derek and Jenna had turned off the light in the guest room. I slipped in my earbuds, dragged out the vacuum, and began my quiet routine through the house. That's when I noticed Ida's deep blue briefcase sitting beside the coffee table. It wasn't mine, and I'd certainly never seen it before. I paused the vacuum, bent down, and picked it up. Inside was a folder, neatly packed. Out of place in my home. There was no name on the cover, but a few printed documents and several envelopes peeked out from within. It looked like something they must have brought with them, maybe forgotten or left out by mistake. My first instinct was to drop it by their bedroom door, but the corner of one document was slightly curled, just enough for a name to catch my eye. Renee White. In that instant, something inside me dropped. My full name, printed clearly beneath the letterhead of a major insurance company. I sat down at the kitchen table, the document shaking in my hand. It was a life insurance policy. The insured, Renee White. The beneficiary, Derek White. Coverage, 500,000. My eyes jumped to the signature line. Renee White. The signature was a decent imitation, close enough for someone who didn't know better. But I knew. I always know. My handwriting has a slight tilt to the right, a rhythm that's impossible to mimic. The one on that page was flat, precise, too neat, nothing like mine. The date on the form, a Saturday 3 months ago. I remembered that day. I'd been out back fixing the fence, my hands sticky with glue and sawdust. There was no way in hell I'd left the house to sign a document I'd never heard of. My heart thudded in my ears, heavy and relentless. I took a deep breath, carefully tucked the papers back exactly as they were, slid the folder into the briefcase, and returned it to its place by the table. I didn't slam doors. I didn't storm into their room. Not yet. I knew better. Now was not the time. They couldn't know I'd seen it. For the next 2 days, I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. I played along. I smiled. I chatted with Derek like usual. I read picture books with Dylan. I even responded to Jenna's soullessly polite small talk. I deliberately left old bills scattered on the kitchen table, giving Derek the chance to accidentally spot them. He took the bait. He started hovering, offering to help organize my paperwork, suggesting he could switch everything to online statements. He even said one of his former clients could get me better deals on home insurance. I nodded. I played the game. But inside, I marked every single word. That insurance policy sat like a splinter in my gut, sharp, constant, impossible to ignore. It told me the truth. This son I'd spent 15 years hoping to see again hadn't come back with guilt or love. He'd come with a ledger and a plan. He could fool the world. But not me. I spent over 30 years as a librarian. I've handled every kind of form, application, and forged excuse you can imagine. I can spot lies in the margins, inconsistencies in tone. One glance, and I know what's off. Derek wanted to fake my signature and cash in on my death. He underestimated the wrong woman. That night, I went into my bedroom, locked my checkbook in a drawer, and pulled out the old wooden chest from beneath my bed. Inside, wrapped in a file folder, was the original signature card I'd filed when I opened my bank account decades ago. I was ready to make the most serious decision of my life. I couldn't just be the old woman waiting for her son to come home anymore. I had to protect myself, my home, my life, and maybe even my grandson. I'm not the kind of woman who screams or makes a scene. You wrong me. I don't yell. I remember every detail until the day you can't lie to me anymore. The next morning, I stood in the bathroom, staring at the faint shadows under my eyes in the mirror. I hadn't slept. My mind was like a broken alarm clock, ringing all night long. $500,000 in life insurance. A forged signature. Derek's sudden change of heart. Every piece pointed to one thing: foul intentions. I called Mrs. Ortega. She answered quickly, her voice as crisp and no-nonsense as ever. Renee, this early? I lowered my voice. I need to see you. The sooner, the better. You free now? Yes, but I need to come to your place. Then I'll make coffee for two. Come on over. 10 minutes later, I threw on a denim jacket, told the house I was heading to the community center, and slipped out. Her house was just 2 streets over, always smelling like coffee and toast. That morning was no exception. She had the newspaper laid out on the table, tapping her finger against it. All right, what the hell's got you looking like you saw a ghost? I told her everything about the insurance document. Every word, every detail. She listened in growing silence, her expression hardening with each sentence. When I said the signature wasn't mine, her eyes narrowed. You have signature samples? I nodded. The original card from my bank account opening. A photocopy from my social security application too. She leaned back in her chair. You need a pro to look at that policy. I've got a friend, used to work in forensic document analysis for the police. Retired now, but she still picks up side work. Want to meet her? I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, she'll have a lot of questions. And you'd better be ready to answer. We set a meeting for 2 days later. In the meantime, I barely let myself leave the house. I was terrified Derek might snoop around if I wasn't there. I started locking my bedroom door at night, keeping important documents close to my chest literally. He kept playing the role of the prodigal son, fetching my newspaper, raking leaves, insisting on cooking every meal. And I kept playing my part, too, smiling, nodding, filing away every word. One night, I made a pot of peppermint tea. Jenna stood up and said, I'll take care of it. You should rest. I gave her a tired smile and returned to the couch. From the corner of my eye, I watched her step into the kitchen. She pulled a small bottle from her purse and, with a quick flick, dumped something into the kettle. My stomach twisted. When she brought me the cup, I made a show of being clumsy, knocking it over before it reached my lips. Scalding tea splashed onto the carpet. Her face drained of color. Oh dear, my hand slipped. I said calmly, looking down. So sorry. She dropped to her knees, frantically blotting at the mess, lips pressed into a stiff smile. No problem at all. Il est pour you un heure. That's all right. I'm not thirsty anymore. She froze, then rose slowly, returning the kettle to the kitchen. That night, I started feeling dizzy. Not the usual tired kind of dizzy, but that slow, sickening, floating kind, like being drunk without the warmth. I clutched the bathroom sink and tried to think back. How many times had she brought me tea? How often had she offered to plate my food? It wasn't coincidence. They weren't just planning to cash in on my life, they were looking to speed things up. The next afternoon, I met with Mrs. Ortega's friend, retired Detective Linda Burnham. She was in her 50s, short-cropped hair, eyes sharp as a scalpel. She flipped through the insurance documents like she'd done it 1,000 times. Within minutes, she pointed out 3 red flags. First off, she said, tapping the signature, the forgery isn't bad, but the capital W is all wrong. Whoever did this rushed it, didn't practice enough. Second, this policy was printed after being submitted online, but there's no record of any account linked to your name on the company's platform. She turned another page, eyebrows raised. Has your son ever had access to your personal documents? I was quiet for a moment. Then it hit my ears ago. When he left, he rummaged through a drawer in the den. I thought he was just looking for loose cash, but now I remember I'd kept an old expired license in that drawer. He must have taken it. He'd been planning this for a long time. And third, she lowered her voice. Any unusual symptoms lately? I nodded once. She sat up straight, carefully sliding the documents back into the envelope. Renee, you need to be very careful. This isn't just about insurance anymore. I clenched my jaw and nodded again. The wind stung my face as I walked home. When I opened the door, Dylan was in the living room working on a puzzle. Jenna was on the couch, smiling as usual. "Nice walk?" she asked, like nothing had happened. I smiled back and sat down. "Lovely." Ran into an old friend. Caught up on some old memories. They didn't know, but I'd already begun. And I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered the truth, every last ugly piece of it. I decided to get tested when I had the third wave of dizziness. That morning, I'd been sitting quietly at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. I hadn't even stood up. Suddenly, the letters blurred as if someone had dragged an eraser across the page, and my stomach lurched violently. Gripping the edge of the table, I slowly pulled myself upright. A faint sound escaped my throat, like some creature's low, helpless cry. The kitchen clock ticked, its second hand sweeping forward with mechanical indifference. I stared at it, each tick pulling at the edges of my consciousness. This wasn't aging. This wasn't stress. Something was taking my clarity, piece by piece. And I was done pretending not to notice the kind gestures. Breakfast, hot tea, gentle reminders. I used Derek and Jenna's trip to the supermarket as my opening. The moment they left, I poured the remaining tea from the kettle into a clean glass bottle, then dug through the trash can and found a crumpled label from an empty pill bottle. One word stood out, smeared but readable: sedative. I snapped photos, pulled on gloves, sealed everything up, and drove straight to a private lab downtown. Burnham had recommended it. No appointment, no questions, just cash. While I waited for the results, I sat in my car, my mind running like a sieve, sifting every moment from the past few days. That first night, I'd slept so deeply I didn't even hear the fridge leaking. The next morning, my limbs were so weak I nearly dropped the squeegee while cleaning the windows. And every time Jenna brought me tea, she'd say it like a lullaby: "Careful, it's hot. Take it slow." I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and remembered something else: her soft voice as she sat with Dylan on the couch. "Grandma's been really tired lately. We need to be extra good." 2 days later, the report was ready. Wearing a gray trench coat, I walked into the lab's front office. The receptionist handed me a sealed envelope. Wordless. Back in the car, I tore it open and pulled out the single-page analysis. Results: positive for benzodiazepine class sedatives. Detected concentration consistent with low-level, sustained ingestion, likely administered via food or beverage. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a kind of cold, measured fury. Fury at being calculated against so precisely. Jenna was smart. She didn't want me to drop dead on the spot. She wanted a slow decline, ideally, for me to pass peacefully in my sleep one night. Just a tired old woman whose heart gave out. A clean death. An easy claim. She was patient. She waited for trust. Waited for my guard to lower. That night, I cooked tomato soup, boiled some pasta, even baked Dylan his favorite cheese sticks. Just like old times. When they returned, I was stirring at the stove. Derek inhaled deeply. "Wow, Mom, this smells amazing. Jenna's never made anything like this." I smiled, ladled the soup into bowls. "Then you're in for a treat." As Jenna sat down, I glanced at her. "Would you grab the new tea blend from the counter? Fix yourself a cup while you're at it." She hesitated just a beat, then stood and went into the kitchen. I watched her go, every step, every movement, etching it into memory. Remember this posture, this expression. This isn't your daughter-in-law. This is someone who wants you gone. After dinner, Derek suggested we watch something together. I told him I was feeling a little dizzy and might lie down. He rushed to help me, the concern on his face perfectly rehearsed. "Don't push yourself, Mom. You really need to rest more." I looked up at him, calm and smiling. "You're right. I'll be careful." But I didn't sleep that night. Burnham had helped me install a small recorder behind the living room wall panel. And that night at exactly 1:30 a.m. I heard them, Derek and Jenna, creeping into the kitchen, their voices hushed but clear. "She's drinking less lately," Jenna said. "Do you think she suspects?" Derek's voice was low, confident. "Doesn't matter. We'll give it 2 more days. If she doesn't slip up again, we move to plan B." Jenna was quiet, then asked, "Are the documents ready? Are you sure she'll sign the will voluntarily?" He let out a soft chuckle. "She blacks out just one more time. I'll get the lawyer to accept a power of attorney. After that, it's just paperwork." I lay in bed, eyes shut, heart thudding like a drum inside a closed coffin. I wasn't a lonely old woman hoping her son would come home anymore. They wanted my life. So now, I was coming for theirs. True clarity only comes when you finally stop pretending not to notice the lies whispered behind your back. That morning, I didn't make breakfast. I sat quietly in the living room, watching Derek and Jenna flutter around the kitchen, exchanging casual banter, while Dylan played with his building blocks on the rug. They moved like this house already belonged to them, like my presence was just a temporary inconvenience, waiting to be cleared out. I calmly finished the black coffee I'd brewed the day before, turned off the TV, and pulled on my coat. "Where you headed, Mom?" Derek asked. I smiled. "Library. I promised to volunteer for a reading program today. Figured I'd pick up some mail on the way." "I'll drive you." "No need. Stay with Dylan. I could use the walk." The sun was just warm enough as I stepped outside. In my bag, I carried the toxicology report, the forged insurance documents, and a copy of the recorded conversation, all sealed neatly in a folder. I boarded the downtown bus like any other retiree on an errand. My first stop, a law office. I used to think making a will too early was like casting a curse on yourself. But now I knew there are worse things than death, like having someone else plan it for you. The lawyer was Cynthia Myers, a woman I'd met at a community seminar a few years back. Her mother had once been conned out of her entire retirement by a nephew. Since then, Cynthia had dedicated her career to protecting seniors from financial exploitation. She listened patiently as I laid out every detail about my son, his sudden return, the forged policy, the sedatives, the recording. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "We'll place your home into a living trust. You'll remain the sole trustee. Nothing can be changed or claimed without your notarized consent." My hand didn't shake when I signed. "I also recommend setting the beneficiary of your estate as a charitable organization or a revocable designated entity. That way, if Derek tries to forge anything again, it'll be legally void." I nodded, voice steady as steel. "Assign it to the Library Endowment Fund. I worked there over 30 years. She smiled, then got to work filing the trust, revising insurance clauses, and even scheduling a home security specialist to install cameras and a new lock system later that week. "And now," she said, her tone shifting slightly, "let's do something more strategic." I raised an eyebrow. "You said you suspect they might escalate. Want to give them a little feedback." I understood exactly what she meant. On the ride home, I rehearsed the lines of my frail old lady performance over and over in my head. When I opened the front door, Derek was whispering something to Jenna at the dining table. He sprang to his feet as soon as he saw me. "Mom, you're back. You okay? You don't look so good." I gave him a weary smile, rubbing my temple. "Yeah, just more dizzy spells. Starting to think you two were right. Maybe it's time I start getting my affairs in order." His eyes lit up too quickly, but he masked it well. "Don't talk like that, Mom." I sank into the chair with a sigh. "I'm not afraid of dying, honestly. I just hate the thought of leaving this house behind without a plan. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer. Get a simple will done. I'll name you as the heir, avoid the mess later." He feigned surprise for a beat, then pulled up a chair beside me, taking my hand in his. "Mom, I'm really touched. But there's no rush. I just want to make sure you're okay." I looked him straight in the eye, smiling faintly. "I know you've always wanted to come back. This house, it was your favorite place growing up." He nodded, hunger flickering behind the mask. "Let's set up a meeting," I added casually. "Just something simple. Nothing too formal." He agreed quickly. I saw him glance at Jenna behind my back and give her the smallest of nods. That night, I invited Dylan to read with me. We picked a picture book called Mr. Fox's Dinner. In the story, the fox tries to lure a young chick into his den, but the chick turns the tables by setting a trap in the forest. At the end, the fox is the one caught. As we reached the last page, I looked at Dylan. "Smart chicks don't let themselves get eaten halfway through the story, right?" He grinned. "Yeah, he trapped the fox." I smiled too. But behind it, my entire board was already set. They thought I was falling into the trap. But what they didn't know was that I'd already peeled back the leaves and buried the snare right where they'd step next. The longer the show ran, the more their patience began to fray at the edges. Derek's smile was getting tighter, more strained with each passing day. Jenna's tone had shifted too. Gone was the sugary politeness. It had been replaced by the clipped, superior cadence of a caregiver speaking to a burden. "Mrs. White," she said one morning after breakfast, her brow furrowed just enough to suggest concern, "I really don't think it's safe for you to be alone in this house anymore. What if you fall in the middle of the night and no one notices? I stared at the cup in her hand, lukewarm, pale yellow. Her special calming peppermint tea, made just for me. And you too? I asked, voice neutral. Would you be willing to stay and take care of me? She hesitated, then gave a bright, practiced smile. Of course. We're here for you. After all, that was the day things started to escalate. Derek brought home a stack of legal form templates. Just some paperwork to help us all feel more at ease, he said. He held out a pen. Mom, let's just fill out the basics. It's never too early, right? I glanced over the documents: medical power of attorney, simplified estate distribution agreements, even a preliminary deed transfer. I played dumb, asked him to explain each one slowly. He was all too eager, grinning like a real estate agent selling beachfront property to someone on oxygen. When he mentioned calling the insurance company to double-check whether the old policy you signed is active, I widened my eyes and tilted my head. Oh, I don't remember that. Maybe you handled it. He laughed like he'd already pocketed the win. But Dylan had started to change. He was never a chatty kid, a little shy maybe. But lately, he'd grown agitated, snapping at toys, yelling in frustration, shouting things like, I don't want to be here, from behind closed doors. That afternoon, I brought him a tin of cookies and sat beside him in the guest room. He was curled up in the corner, holding a plush dinosaur, eyes rimmed red. What's wrong? I asked gently. He didn't answer at first. Then, barely a whisper. I don't like when you're sick. My heart clenched. Who told you I was sick? Dad and Mom talk about it at night, he muttered, twisting the edge of his sleeve. They said you don't move when you sleep. They said, you'll be gone soon. I kept my face still, every muscle tight as a thread. Mom said the house will be ours. I pressed my palms into my knees to keep from shaking. Dylan, I said slowly, I'm right here. Talking, walking, baking cookies. Do I seem like someone who's about to go? He looked up. Uncertain. No, not really. I took his little hand in mine. We're family, not props in someone else's story. Got that? He nodded, his fingers twitching lightly in my palm like a small animal testing the water. That night, Derek knocked on my door, face smug with thinly veiled triumph. Mom, the lawyer can stop by tomorrow. Just a quick visit. Talk through everything. Make sure it's all clear. I feigned exhaustion. Tomorrow. Ugh, I've been feeling so lightheaded lately. A flash of excitement sparked in his eyes. Then we really should do this now. While you're still able to make decisions. Sure, I sighed. You go ahead and set it up. Want me to fill out the property section for you? He asked, pulling the documents from a manila folder. You just need to sign. I looked at him evenly. I'll fill it out tonight. I said the house was yours. I meant it. He beamed like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket. In that moment, I finally understood what greed really looked like, how it smiled at you like it was doing you a favor. They thought they'd won. Thought I'd believed them. That I'd signed. That I'd finally let my guard down. They even started talking openly about long-term plans in front of me. Jenna mentioned putting up a swing set in the backyard. Derek talked about upgrading the living room with a bigger TV. They didn't want to care for me. They wanted me gone legally, quietly, quickly. What they didn't know was that the document I signed that night was a decoy, nothing more than a prop for their little show. The real trust paperwork, complete with legal authority, had been safely tucked away in a bank deposit box downtown days ago. I wasn't falling into their trap. They were dancing straight into mine. And when the curtain falls, when the lights come on and the audience stands up, they'll find out the final act doesn't end the way they planned. That night, I turned off every light in the house, leaving only a dim hallway night light flickering at the far end like a tired star. In the decades since my husband passed, the house had never felt this eerie, this quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed in my nightgown, listening. Downstairs, I could hear the soft clink of a glass. Derek pouring water. Jenna murmuring something beneath her breath. Her voice was low, urgent, but charged, like an actor rehearsing one final line before curtain call. I checked the time. 8 a.m. 3 hours earlier. I had drunk the cup of herbal tea they'd so kindly prepared for me, watched eagerly by 2 pairs of eyes. But what they didn't know was that I'd only let the liquid brush my lips before slipping into the bathroom, spitting it out, and rinsing my mouth with clean tea I had hidden in a thermos under the sink. They were still waiting for the drugs to take effect. I was waiting for the police. 2 days earlier, I'd delivered everything to Burnham, the lab report, The forged documents. The recordings. She'd reached out to local authorities. We've installed an exterior mic outside your front porch, she said. Once we detect movement consistent with intent, we're coming in. Fast. For the first time, I truly understood the meaning of not fighting alone. 1:18 a.m. Footsteps on the stairs. Quiet, almost too careful, like someone trying not to breathe. I knew those steps. Light, deliberate. Derek. He pushed open my bedroom door. I kept my eyes closed and pretended to be asleep. He stood at my bedside for several seconds, then slowly leaned in. I could feel the movement of air as his fingers hovered near my face, just close enough to feel for breath. Not lovingly, not even with concern. It was the touch of someone checking a box, confirming a task. He started to straighten up, turn away. That's when I opened my eyes. Not dead yet, I said softly. Disappointed. His body froze, locked in place like he'd been struck from behind. Mom, he stammered, what are you doing awake? I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. My eyes cold. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. He opened his mouth to respond. And then came the knock. Firm. Measured. Unmistakable. This is the county sheriff's department. Open the door. Derek didn't move. He stood frozen on the stairs, pale as ash. Jenna came stumbling from the guest room, still in her pajamas, panic in every step. I walked calmly to the front door and opened it. 2 officers stepped inside. Burnham followed behind, eyes sweeping the foyer with practiced ease. Ms. White, she said, nodding. Right on schedule. Derek finally snapped out of his daze and stormed down the stairs. This is a mistake. We didn't do anything. She's sick. She's losing it. Burnham didn't even blink. She pulled a document from her coat pocket. We have evidence of deliberate poisoning, as well as a record of your wife's purchase of illegal sedatives. And let's not forget the fraudulent life insurance policy you filed under your mother's name. Jenna staggered backward like someone had yanked the floor out from under her. The officers stepped forward. Derek White, one began. You are under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and the administration of toxic substances with intent to harm. You have the right to remain silent. Derek lost it. You shouldn't even have that money. Mom, he screamed, his voice hoarse with rage. Why are you holding on to it? You're wasting time. Wasting our lives. You can't even climb the stairs some nights. Why won't you just move on already? Why didn't you let it go? He was shaking, spitting fury no longer the smiling sun, just a rabid animal finally unmasked. Jenna sobbed beside him, trembling as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. I didn't know it would go this far, she cried. He said it was just to help her sleep, said she'd feel nothing. I didn't know. I didn't respond. Didn't even glance at them. I walked to the top of the stairs and found Dylan. He was standing there, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, eyes wide with fear. I bent down, wrapped my arms around him. It's okay, sweetheart, I whispered, voice low but certain. I'm fine. I told you I wouldn't go anywhere and I meant it. And I won't let anyone lie to you again. As the patrol car pulled away, dawn broke over the trees and spilled gold onto the roof of my house. I stood at the doorway, watching the lights disappear down the street. No joy, no vengeance, just a quiet stillness. They were gone, and no funereal life could begin. After the truth came out, it was like someone had flipped the chessboard. All the smiles that had hidden malice, all the quiet little moves made behind my back exposed under full sunlight, raw and grotesque. Derek's arrest hit the local news the very next day. The headline didn't pull any punches. Man arrested after forging mother's signature for insurance scam, poison plot foiled. The photo showed him in handcuffs, hair disheveled, his face hollow and dazed. Not a trace of the so-called devoted son remained. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, watching the report on TV. Mrs. Ortega came by and sat across from me, her eyes fixed on the screen as she shook her head. I told you, she muttered. There was always something wrong with that boy's eyes. She paused. If you hadn't held on. I nodded but said nothing. I didn't want to talk about if. In the days that followed, neighbors started showing up at my door. Some brought warm apple pie. Others left baskets of fresh vegetables or bouquets clipped from their gardens. A few simply pulled me into a hug and said, "You're brave, Renee." I didn't feel brave. I just knew if I didn't stand up, I'd be buried alive in the story they had written for me. Jenna's case unraveled even faster than Derek's. She was slapped with additional charges accessory to poisoning, fraud, conspiracy. Her bail was denied 3 times. Her lawyer took to the media, calling her a controlled wife, a woman who lacked agency. Maybe that was true. But when she poured sedatives into my tea, she never once flinched. Derek, meanwhile, cracked. 3 days in county lockup, and he was begging for a psychological evaluation. His attorney sent me a letter, asking for compassion and consideration for his mental health. I read the letter without trembling. My pulse didn't skip. I simply murmured to myself, compassion. Did he show any when he decided my life was worth more dead than alive? When he turned my own house into a coffin with the lid half shut? I didn't write back, and I don't intend to forgive. That week, I did 2 things that mattered. First, I applied for temporary custody of Dylan. When the caseworker visited for the first time, I had the guest room scrubbed spotless. On the desk were picture books and a fresh box of crayons. A pot of mac and cheese simmered on the stove. She looked around and asked, "You really think you can care for a 5-year-old on your own?" I smiled. I managed to survive 2 full-grown con artists. You think a teething kid is going to be the one to break me? She laughed, but softer this time, with respect in her eyes. He trusts you, she said. That means something. Second, I attended a town hall on senior rights and financial safety. The moderator called me up. "She's the woman awake on our street," he said. I told them I wasn't extraordinary. I just learned to recognize a signal. When your grown child suddenly becomes too helpful, too loving, too eager, trust your gut. Something's off. After the talk, a woman in a worn denim jacket shuffled up to me, whispering, "My son-in-law's been real helpful lately. Says he wants to help me sell my car. Think I should look into it." I rested a hand on her shoulder. It's not digging that's dangerous. It's not digging that'll get you hurt. Sometimes, getting older doesn't mean you need to know every law or trick in the book. It just means you have to believe something simple and powerful. You're worth protecting, especially when no one else is doing it for you. After Dylan officially moved in, I hung a new sign by the front door. Renee Dylan, hand-carved from wood by a neighbor down the block. And just like that, the house that had once echoed with silence began to fill with life. Mornings no longer meant only the soft drip of the coffee pot. Now there were the sounds of splashing water, little feet pounding down the hallway, and a voice calling out again and again, "Grandma, where are my dinosaur socks?" I never imagined that at 65, I'd get to hear those sounds again. But they came like sprouts breaking through soil, and I knew, for the first time in a long time, that spring had truly arrived. When Dylan started school, I'd walk him to the corner each morning, hand in hand, and wait with him at the bus stop. We'd wave at the driver together. Neighbors started leaving notes on my porch, sometimes hand-drawn cards from their kids, sometimes a warm "thinking of you." My world, once quiet and shadowed, was now filled with the bright clutter of living. On a Wednesday morning, I gave a talk at the town library. How to spot financial abuse in later life. I stood in the small auditorium and looked out over a sea of women about my age. Some wore floral scarves, some had hearing aids, some leaned on canes, and others held their husbands' hands like anchors. I said, "They tell us to be gentle as we age, to let go, to stay quiet. But here's what I want you to hear instead. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to say, 'I don't agree.'" Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. One woman let out a long, quiet sigh like she'd been holding her breath for years. After the talk, a local radio host approached me. She asked if I'd be willing to record an episode. I smiled and said, "Only if you don't mind me bringing a 5-year-old assistant who insists on interrupting every good story." That weekend, Dylan and I made dinner together. He peeled corn with intense concentration while I stirred a pot of chowder and roasted herb chicken legs. At the table, with sauce all over his chin, he beamed and declared, "Today's dinner is way better than restaurants." Afterward, he watched cartoons from the couch while I washed dishes. When I came out, he was already curled up and fast asleep, draped over the arm of the sofa. I scooped him up gently and carried him to bed. As I tucked him in, he stirred and mumbled, "Grandma, you won't leave, right?" I whispered, "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm right here. Always." When I stepped out, the lights outside poured through the window, casting soft gold across the floor. I paused in the living room, looking at the wall of photographs. There was one of me and my husband when we were young, arms around each other in front of our first house. After he died, I thought that photo was the last steady point in my life. Then came a shot of Derek, as a child, chasing butterflies in the garden. And then, a long, blank stretch. But that blank space had started to fill in. Now, at the end of the row, was a new photo. Me and Dylan outside the library, him holding up a giant book, me laughing beside him. My story wasn't over. I wasn't just the woman who'd been betrayed by her son. I was Renee White, a librarian, a community volunteer, a grandmother, a woman who walked through the storm and came out with her spine unbroken. Some people say growing old is a slow fade out, a long goodbye, but not me. Before the lights go down, I'm turning the music up, and I'm dancing the last song all the way through.